Something is happening in Vienna tonight. Three quiet Canadians are sitting inside the audience of the world's biggest televised song contest. They are not there for the music. They are not tourists. They are observers, dispatched directly by Canada's public broadcaster, taking notes, studying camera angles, watching diplomatic handshakes behind the scenes that no one outside the room will ever hear about. And no one in North America is paying attention. But Europe is. Breaking tonight, the director of the Eurovision Song Contest has confirmed to the BBC that the doors are open for Canada to join. Not a maybe, not a vague hope, an open invitation. Martin Green, the man who controls one of the most watched cultural events on planet Earth, looked directly into a BBC camera this week and said the words that Ottawa has been quietly waiting to hear for almost a year. For 70 years, our doors have been open, and we will welcome anyone through those doors who wants to share the values of this wonderful occasion and stand on our stage with friends. Dear viewers, do not mistake what you just heard for a friendly cultural gesture. This is something far bigger. Because Martin Green did not stop there. In the very same interview, he name-dropped a Canadian Prime Minister. He said, and we quote directly, "We know that Mark Carney wants to sort of embrace Europe." Translation: the highest cultural authority on the European continent just publicly acknowledged that Canada's Prime Minister is courting Europe, and Europe is courting back. In public, on the BBC, with the entire diplomatic world listening. This is not about pop music. This is about something this channel has been telling you for months. Canada is pivoting. Quietly, deliberately, and faster than most analysts in Washington or Toronto expected. The Eurovision file is the latest signal, and arguably the loudest one yet in the cultural arena. Let's rewind. In November of last year, when Mark Carney's government tabled its first federal budget, there was a single line buried inside the section on CBC and Radio Canada that most journalists glossed over. The government, the budget said, was working with CBC Radio Canada to explore participation in Eurovision. No price tag, no timeline, no fanfare, just a sentence. But sentences inside federal budgets are never accidents. Days after that budget was tabled, Mark Carney spoke to reporters. He didn't hedge, he didn't soften. He said, and listen to this carefully, "We want Canadian culture on a global stage. Best culture in the world, best music in the world. I think Europe deserves to see it too." Translation: Canada is no longer content to be a polite cultural exporter routed through American distribution channels. Canada wants to walk directly onto a European stage, broadcast into hundreds of millions of European living rooms, and bypass Washington entirely. That is not a small idea. That is a strategic pivot dressed up in sequins and stage lights. If you have been following this channel, you already know the bigger picture. Since taking office, Carney has been on a relentless campaign to diversify Canada's external relationships away from a single, dominant partner to the south. We have covered the trade conversations. We have covered the security pacts. We have walked you through the energy talks with Berlin, the critical minerals discussions with Brussels, the rare earth conversations being whispered about in Paris. Now culture joins the list. And this is where it gets sharper. While Carney was making speeches in Ottawa, CBC was making moves in Europe. Leon Marr, the Senior Director of Public Affairs for CBC and Radio Canada, confirmed to Global News this week that the broadcaster has 3 staff members physically attending this year's Eurovision contest in Vienna as observers. 3. Quietly placed inside the European Broadcasting Union's biggest event of the year. And those 3 Canadians are not there to enjoy the show. They are there to study how it works, how it broadcasts, how it scales, and how Canada might plug into the entire machine. Marr also confirms something else that flew under the radar of nearly every headline. CBC, he said, is currently in active talks with the European Broadcasting Union about exchanging news content and music content. Not someday, not eventually, now. Translation: Canada is already building the pipes that would allow Canadian stories, Canadian music, and Canadian journalism to flow directly into European broadcasters, and European content to flow into Canadian homes. The Eurovision question is just the visible tip of a much larger integration that is already underway in the background. Here's the catch. CBC has been an associate member of the European Broadcasting Union since 1950. 75 years of quiet partnership inside the room where European broadcasters set the rules. But associate is not full. And associate members don't just walk onto the Eurovision stage. They need a formal invitation, signed and stamped by the EBU itself. A handful of broadcasters outside Europe have received one before. Australia did it, Cyprus did it, Israel did it, Canada has not. Yet. And here is the question this channel has been turning over since the budget line first appeared. Why now? Why, after 70 years of polite distance, is Ottawa suddenly interested in a European music contest broadcast from Vienna? The answer is not music. The answer is timing. Carney took office at a moment when Canada's most important trading and security relationship, the one with Washington, was the most unpredictable it has been in the modern history of the country. Tariffs, threats, public humiliations from the Oval Office, renegotiated agreements, broken assumptions. Every week, Canadians have watched the foundational pillar of their economic and security architecture wobble. And every week, Ottawa has been working, privately, methodically, to build new pillars somewhere else. If you appreciate this kind of analysis, the kind you will not find in tomorrow's headlines, take a second right now and subscribe to Canada Next. We stay ahead of the story so you never have to chase it. So when Mark Carney talks about Eurovision, he is not talking about a singing competition. He is talking about cultural visibility on a continent of 450 million people. He is talking about Canadian artists, Canadian languages, Canadian production standards being broadcast into primetime slots in Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, Madrid. He is talking about soft power, the kind of soft power the United States has used for decades to shape the world's imagination, being redirected through a European channel. And Europe knows it. Martin Green's BBC interview was not casual. Directors of cultural institutions on that scale do not name-drop foreign prime ministers by accident. Green's comments were a message, broadcast to Brussels, to London, to Berlin, and yes, to Washington. The message was simple. Europe sees Canada. Europe wants Canada. And Europe is making room on its biggest cultural stage for a country that, for most of its modern history, looks south, to Hollywood, to New York, to American radio for its cultural cues. Dear viewers, that shift is bigger than it sounds. But there's a problem on the table tonight, and we need to talk about it. This year's Eurovision is not a clean stage. 5 European countries, Spain, Ireland, the Netherlands, Slovenia, and Iceland, are boycotting the contest in protest of Israel's continued military operations in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran. Israel, a former winner and itself a non-European participant under the EBU's umbrella, nonetheless advanced this week to the final alongside 9 other countries. That controversy will become Canada's controversy the moment Ottawa signs a formal request to participate. Any Canadian government that joins Eurovision will inherit not just a stage, but a political minefield with cameras pointed at it. Cultural diplomacy is never just culture, and Ottawa knows it. There is also the cost question. The CBC has looked at Eurovision participation before, years ago, under different governments. The verdict at the time was that it was simply too expensive to justify. The federal budget that mentioned Eurovision last November did not attach a dollar figure to the line. That silence is itself revealing. It suggests Ottawa is still negotiating, still calculating, still measuring how much cultural visibility on a European stage is worth to a country trying to redefine where it stands in the world order. but the strategic logic is moving in one direction. And anyone old enough to remember 1988 already knows how this scene used to play out. A 20-year-old from Quebec named Celine Dion walked onto the Eurovision stage in Dublin that April. She didn't sing for Canada because Canada had no seat at the table. She sang for Switzerland. She won. And the world watched a Canadian voice carry a European flag to victory. Translation: Canada has been quietly powering Europe's biggest cultural moments for decades. Carney's gamble is that it is finally time for Canada to carry its own flag. Before we go, a quick note for the people watching this channel for the first time. If you want the long-form context behind every major Canada-Europe story breaking right now, the trade deals, the defense talks, the cultural realignments that the legacy press are missing, make sure you are following along with us. We stay ahead of the headlines so you can stay ahead of the world. So where does all of this leave us tonight? The director of Eurovision has publicly opened the door. The Canadian Prime Minister has publicly walked toward it. The Canadian public broadcaster has quietly placed observers inside Vienna and is actively negotiating with the European Broadcasting Union on content exchanges that reach far beyond a single song contest. And the federal budget itself has, in writing, committed Ottawa to exploring participation. Everything required for Canada to join Eurovision is now in motion. The only thing missing is a formal letter from Ottawa to Geneva. And in diplomacy, the absence of a letter is rarely a refusal. It is almost always a question of when, not if. When that letter is sent, and this channel believes it will be sent, Canada will have made one of the most public, most televised, and most symbolically powerful declarations of its European pivot to date. A declaration broadcast not in a press conference, not in a communique, but in front of 200 million people in living rooms across an entire continent. This is not about Eurovision. This is about a country choosing where to stand. And Canada, dear viewers, is choosing to stand with Europe. This is Canada Next. I'll see you tomorrow.